Build your own world. Or in other words, develop your story's setting. This is the environment in which the storyline is laid out, the world that you intend to draw your audience into, where your characters exist, and where everything takes place. In this video, we will be taking a look specifically at how to build a fantasy world. To do this, we will be focusing on 4 simple but very important points that you must cover when building a world of your own. Starting off with our first point, the geography. It is vital to understand the geography of your world. To do this, start by describing the physical features of the environment, such as the landscape, climate, and wildlife in as much detail as possible, as the audience has no frame of reference when trying to imagine this place, as until now it hasn't existed. In addition to this, you should aim to develop a clear idea of how your world is laid out. To do this, consider designing and laying out a map to get a visual representation of the world for your own referral. You can create this from scratch if you feel up to it, or base it on already existing maps of the real world and just alter them slightly, as many great fantasy writers have done before you. During this process, I'd advise you to make multiple maps, beginning with a world map, laying out every location and visualizing their positions, which can help you gain a better understanding of things like the time it may take for a character to travel from one place to another, or how an event that takes place in one location may impact a different location within its vicinity. After this, lay out smaller, more specific maps depicting certain areas of interest to give more detail. You won't need to do this for every location, however I would advise you to create these for each location that is either visited by your protagonists or is an area in which key plot-related events take place. Moving on to the second point, the inhabitants. When creating your world, remember that besides your protagonists, the characters that act as a window from which the majority of your world will be viewed, there will be other characters that make up the general population. In a game, you would refer to these characters as NPCs, or non-playable characters, and although often overlooked, how detailed or basic these characters appear can have a major impact on how vibrant and alive your world seems.
Need something?
Of course, depicting either an abundance of these or a lack of would depend on your story and the atmosphere you intend to create within the world that story is set. Displaying a lack of inhabitants in contrast to your protagonist would be great for an apocalyptic survival story, for example. In addition to deciding upon the abundance of the world's population, be sure to list the different demographics of those that live within it, populating the different countries and cities, and remember whilst doing this to take as many notes as possible regarding the characteristics of these groups and their relationships to one another. Bringing us on to our third point, the language. Now that we have decided who will populate your world, it's time to look at how the inhabitants of this world will communicate. Remember that this will not only influence the characters' names and the titles given to particular locations you decide to add to your world, but also affect your audience and the way they receive the dialogue. For example, if the character's primary language doesn't match that of your primary audience, subtitles may be required, or you may intend for what is being said to remain a mystery, and this is something to bear in mind. When building a fantasy world, you will of course have complete free rein when deciding on the languages used within that world. You could create a completely fictional language from scratch, or use an already existing language that you can either keep the way it is, or alter slightly. You also have the option to feature multiple languages with varying origins. The choice is yours. This is your world. So there is no limit to what you decide to do with the spoken and written languages that exist within it. However, I would recommend that you take extensive notes when developing your language and document all points of inspiration behind place names, phrases, and dialects for your own reference to ensure continuity. And now our fourth and final point, the history. This is essentially the point where context is given to each of the previous points, offering an explanation of how the geography, inhabitants, and language have become what they are now, at the time your story will be set. So ask yourself, what is the history of this world? To have a completed story, you don't necessarily need to have worked out a detailed and extensive history of the world that the story is set within. But just as with the real world, knowing a little history helps you tie up loose ends and make sense of current events. Also, keep in mind that a detailed understanding of your world's history will not only help give depth to your characters and the story's current setting, but will also help with the future development of your story if you ever decide to create any sequels or prequels. So I'd advise you to at least create some sort of overall timeline so that you can visualize the current course of events and decide at which point of the world's history your story will be set. You should list any major past incidents, even if they aren't shown in your story, as this will also help to imagine how anything that took place in the past may have had an impact on the current climate. It may also be worth using this as an opportunity to take notes of the ancestry of some of the key characters of your world, when certain figures related to them lived, what they did, and how these things have had an impact on the world as it is today. So after taking note of the points made in this video, you should have a better understanding of what it takes to create a vibrant and detailed world of your very own. And remember, your only limit is your own imagination. So have some fun and see what you come up with. As always, if you think there's anything I may have missed in this video and believe it may be of value to any aspiring creator that comes across it, please do not hesitate to pop it in the comments, as we're all in this together, and any further opinions you think may be helpful to others will always be welcome. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next one.